So, funny thing. I've been wanting to make a video about this little game that goes by the name of F22 Lightning 3 for some time now. Because what Colin McRae Rally 2.0 did for me with rally games, this game did the same with military flight sims. However, yeah, I still have some things to figure out to get this to look presentable for a video. But that got me thinking. Surely there is some game out there that could let me relive this experience. A large-scale, semi-realistic air combat game, with all the good stuff that comes with having been developed within the last century. Like controller and joystick support, widescreen resolutions, and most importantly, retaining the ability to drop a goddamn 250 kiloton nuke on your enemies. Ladies and gentlemen, the airbase no longer starts, and this is Nuclear Option. Because this game is not at all what I expected it to be when I first saw it on my Steam store page. You would be forgiven with a name like Nuclear Option for thinking that this was a strategy game similar to DEFCON or First Strike, which, given the price, would probably make you just scroll past without giving it a second look. Which is a shame, because if it did catch your attention enough to click on it, you would realize that that's not what the game is at all. Not a strategy game, but a sim-cade military flight simulator. A niche, in fact, that I've been looking to fill for quite some time now. I think this might actually be enough for some people to just click off of this video and go check the game's store page out for themselves, because I don't think I'm alone in wanting to play something like this. It's just that I think, unfortunately, Nuclear Option may be having a sort of branding issue. As we will see, nukes are not as big a part of the gameplay as you might expect given the name, so calling it something that would represent the fact that it's essentially if VTOL VR was played on a monitor would attract many more players who are already looking for that sort of experience. That being said, this game is a lot of fun. But before we get into why that is, there is one thing I need to mention first and foremost. This game is in early access, and I already know what some of you are thinking. I have been burned one too many times to even consider dropping 1500 pennies on more live service smut. And usually, I would agree. The last video I did similar to this was about Police Simulator. Yeah, nice version 1.0 you've got there, lads. But if Nuclear Option came out with a 1.0 release tomorrow, I wouldn't really bat an eye. I've only managed to come across one minor UI issue, as well as another small problem with aircraft selection. But other than that, considering what is already in the game, this already feels like a very fleshed out experience. Anything else that gets added at this point, like new aircraft, weapons, maybe maps or a campaign, would just be a bonus at this point. We have 7 planes, a helicopter, and a transport VTOL. There's a plethora of weapons including air-launched ballistic missiles, ARAS, JDAMs. All the stars are here! And this is all considering the price, which, with a mission editor and workshop support, is frankly low for how much time you can sink into this game. Earlier I compared this game to F22 Lightning 3, but the similarities are honestly pretty minor. You can drop nukes from stealth aircraft. That's kind of it. But there is another, more recent game that actually has even more similarities. One that I've actually covered on this channel before. VTOL VR. This is basically VTOL VR on a monitor. VTOL HDMI. You get the large open maps with pre-made missions, including all sorts of different objective types and challenges. You can fly in co-op with your friends, or you can do these massive open-ended Conquest-style missions that take literal hours to fully resolve in single-player, co-op, or full-out multiplayer. Which is actually awesome for a couple of reasons. First, not everyone that would love VTOL VR has access to a VR headset. And two, as great as that game is, VR in itself is just inherently a pain in the ass. Like, every now and again I'll think to myself, maybe I'll play some VR tonight. Then I sit there thinking about how I'll have to get down on my hands and knees to fucking unplug my monitor, plug that HDMI and USB in, go back in there to plug my lighthouses in, place them in such a way that they will keep me in their field of view, update my Optimus drivers, probably replace the batteries in my fucking controller. All for like an hour or two of gameplay before I unplug and leave it to collect dust for another 6 months. It is so cool to have something that provides a similar experience without all of the hassle. Like, you don't even need a controller to play, let alone a HOTAS, though it does support both of them if you want to use them. You can use your mouse as a virtual joystick, and it works pretty well. All that is to say that the barrier of entry is very low. Hell, even hardware-wise, it's a breath of fresh air. Recommended GTX 970 and 4 gigs of storage. What is this, fucking Papa's Pizzeria? There's some slight optimization work that could still be done. The game can sometimes slow down dramatically while flying through clouds, but 99% of the time it is immaculately smooth. But I think that's enough for a broad overview. Maybe you want to get down to the brass tacks of what you can actually do in this game. So, let's do just that. I've already mentioned that there are pre-made missions available, ones that have a more rigid structure to them. All of them have pre-selected aircraft and loadouts, and most of them are also very easy to finish in like 5 minutes. Great to get into after you've ran through the tutorials, but it's really just a teaser. The Conquest modes are where the real replay value is. Altercation, Confrontation, Domination, Escalation, and Terminal Control. Each getting longer and more complicated in that order. Assuming you've got a handle on how the game works, single-player Altercation will take you less than half an hour to complete. Confrontation gets up to 45 minutes. Domination and Escalation is where you start to go over the hour mark, and Terminal Control gets pretty ridiculous. Co-op and multiplayer matches will probably not last as long just due to the fact that human beings have been gifted with the holy attribute of communication and coordination, whereas the bots just kind of fly out and do whatever and whenever they feel like. You definitely end up feeling like an ace combat protagonist with how much hard carrying you end up doing in single player, but hey, it wouldn't be too bad if you could save your progress, but this is one of those games where the single player mode is basically just a private local match. Kind of like this one game I've been looking forward to finally coming out. Oh well. We'll skip Altercation for now for reasons I will explain in just a moment, going straight into Confrontation. First things first, we have to pick our faction. Boscali Defense Force or the Primeva Armed Liberation Alliance. Don't think about it too much, they both come with the exact same planes. There's no lore behind the two factions to explain things like that, so I made my own. Basically, in the mid-20th century, the region saw a sudden influx of a large number of immigrants, sold oil to the United States in exchange for military equipment, had enough of their shit, and started to use their own equipment against them. Next we pick an airport to spawn at. There are more of these in the longer Conquest modes, and some of them have restrictions for what type of aircraft can take off from them. You can click on any of them for now, and if you find that you can't get the plane you want, you can just switch air bases from the loadout menu anyway. Once we've selected an airfield, we can see the aircraft selection at the top of the screen. Some of them will be grayed out, either because you can't spawn them at this specific airfield, or because they were disabled altogether for this mission. Altercation only allows light aircraft, hence why I skipped it. Even this mode, Confrontation, disables the 2 bombers, because if it didn't, the match would probably end in about 10 minutes the second you strapped some ICBMs on all them hoes. FedEx. But we can't just jump straight into the best jets right from the get-go. Oh no. The world of nuclear option operates on the simple notion that there are 2 ways to get ahead in life: status and money. Prove yourself to be a reliable pilot by racking up kills, and you might eventually be trusted to reserve some of the nicer aircraft as you rise up the ranks. However, if you're the type who would rather stick it to the man, you can always empty a couple $100 million out of your own pocket to fund that one-way trip. Everyone can be persuaded with enough cash in hand. It is a much smarter idea to cuck it out and progress through the levels though, as some of the weapons you will probably need to use later down the line get quite expensive. It took me a while to figure this out, by the way. I think it could be made a little bit more obvious that weapons do, in fact, cost money to equip. There are a couple of other issues on the screen as well that seem like bugs to me. The first one is that you can only see a weapon's description if you first change to another weapon, then cycle back to the one you want. The other is that if you have reserved an aircraft but wish to reserve a different one, you might have to hop to a different airfield to unreserve it, if the new one you want to take off from doesn't support it. That does seem like an oversight that could be fixed pretty easily. I don't really feel like it's necessary to go into detail about everything you can fly in this game, but I'll just mention now that they're only inspired versions of real aircraft like in VTOL VR. for obvious legal reasons. But this game does differ in the way that some of the results are just straight up cursed.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no.
And we are in. Hold on, let me get the old manual out real quick. Remind myself of how to get this old buck started. Oh, it's literally just throttle up and we're off. Yeah, it's not that type of game where you're going to be pressing buttons in the cockpit. It's all about the action. There are a lot of simplified controls like this that make playing the game with a controller an absolute treat. It was clearly designed with controllers in mind. You don't have to worry about flaps, for example. When you lower your landing gear, they deploy right with them. VTOL aircraft tilt their thrusters automatically depending on your airspeed and whether your landing gear is down. Selecting targets is as simple as looking at them with the right stick and pressing X. The only time I have to take my hand off of the controller is when I decide to designate targets on the map. And if I'm needing to do that, then I'm probably far away from any sort of danger anyway. But that's not to say that the game feels overly arcadey. The aircraft behave how you might expect if you've played any other sims, down to even how the wind affects how they fly, or how your plane tilts if you have an uneven loadout. Even stealth is properly modeled, showing you your radar cross-section, which changes as you add weapons under your wings. You also never need to be autistically precise with anything. Selecting targets is very forgiving with how far away they can be from your cursor whilst they're registering. And every weapon in this game, with the only exception being your guns, will home in on selected targets. Equip a bomb, select a target, fly level, and fire and forget once you are in range. Well, Hub, that sure sounds like a piece of piss. Is there any challenge to be found in this here game?
Right engine fire.
Turn out those lights!
Using your weapons is easy, but pretty much all of the air-to-ground munitions can be shot down by enemy anti-air. Even bombs can be taken out from fairly long distances if there is a powerful enough SAM hiding in the terrain somewhere. Which is something I don't really remember being such a big deal in VTOL VR. I could check, but again, that would require me to get down on my hands and knees. No one wants to see that. Anti-air vehicles are, then, the top priority. As with them online, you'll struggle to get even a single hit on any of your objectives. You then have two options. Either you try to use the terrain to sneak close enough to their missile trucks to hit them before they know what's even happening, which usually results in your untimely demise. Or we go with the safer, but more costly option of
Oversaturation.
send so many munitions in that they won't know what the fuck they're even meant to target. Now, not all AA batteries are built equal. Spags are probably the easiest to overwhelm, often only requiring only 1 or 2 AGMs or a lucky hit with an ARAD. Try to take out a ship, however, and you might run into trouble even with a whole truckload of cruise missiles. And let's not forget that you will probably be getting shot at. If not by the vehicle you're targeting, then a closer one that you may be overlooked. Or one of those fuckers that can ping you from the other side of the map. Not to mention any fighter jets flying around, which is going to be a problem because the damage model in this game is very unforgiving. One missile is more than enough to end your flight early the vast majority of the time. Which gets us into the anti-air missiles, which sort of behave in a realistic way. However, they're also gamified in a way that promotes a certain behavior. On the one side, they inherit some characteristics you may be used to if you're at all familiar with combat flight sims. You can extend your missile range by flying fast and flying high. You can break lock-on by hiding behind terrain, and radar notching is a built-in mechanic to the point that your HUD shows you which way to fly to notch incoming missiles. However, that last part is very unreliable. And I know it's not meant to be, realistically speaking, but I mean, I don't think I ever managed to break lock just by notching without also using the jammer. I also think it might be impossible to outmaneuver even the slower ground-launched heat seekers, though most of the jets are fast enough to outrun them if they're coming directly from behind. I think this might come down to the fact that it's very rare to be far enough away from your enemies to not be within the no escape zone of their weapons. I actually wouldn't mind seeing weapon ranges slightly reduced from what they are now. The only thing you have left to protect yourself then are your countermeasures. Flares for heat seekers and the jammer for radar missiles. The former are the most simple as you don't really have to do anything else, just hold down the button until the lock breaks. But you really don't get a lot of flares to play with. Usually it's enough to defeat 2 or 3 missiles, after which you either have to head back to base or let Jesus take the stick and hope for the best. On the other hand, the jammer replenishes its power from your running engines, so running out is not often an issue. However, for it to successfully defeat a lock, you have to use it while also notching, putting you off course from whatever village you're on your way to liberating. Notch without the jammer, you're in for a hammer. Jam without notching, you know what, fuck it.
Right engine fire.
If it sounds like I'm complaining, then I'm really not, because the result is that there is only so much a good player is going to be able to achieve in a single sortie. Missiles are a real threat. You can't just fly wherever you feel like and not expect to get shot at. If you run out of flares, which will happen very quickly, you are as good as dead if you're flying low enough for heat seekers to be an issue. And since flares are such a scarce resource, you'll find yourself having to head back to base very often to restock them along with your weapons. Because the aircraft in this game do actually carry a fairly realistic amount of munitions. If you take off with 16 bombs, that's a maximum of 16 targets you can take out in a single flight, and that's assuming that none of them get shot down before hitting, which they probably will. Meanwhile, you will most likely be getting harassed by long-ranged AA, which will force you off course to defend yourself. Essentially, you're not going to go into a match and come across some mad lad with a full sim setup, who is able to single-handedly end the game in the first few minutes. And that's good, because the matches get more interesting the longer they go on. More ground units slowly start to deploy as the match unravels. Eventually you might see ships entering the map equipped with long-range cruise missiles that will level your bases if you don't take care of them. And of course, you might start to see players flying out with some nukes. Notice how long it took me to finally get to talk about the nukes in nuclear option. One of the more common victory conditions in these conquest modes is quite simple. It boils down to destroying enough buildings in some designated objective zones. The other one is capturing airfields, which is actually quite cool because you can either protect your ground units until they get to it and capture it that way, or you can drop units on it directly in your Osprey. It's actually a surprisingly versatile aircraft. You can even fly around rescuing downed pilots and capturing enemy ones for extra cash. But I digress. You can, of course, destroy the objective buildings with a more tried-and-true approach, whereas nukes are basically just a quicker, albeit a much more expensive, shortcut to achieving this objective, because it usually only takes one of them. However, all of these same rules apply. If you haven't taken care of all the anti-air units in the area, your nukes are going to get shot down. Even those air-launched ballistic missiles that climb up to 200,000 feet and re-enter at hypersonic speeds are not safe from a head-on collision. And since they cost so much to equip, you will probably not have enough money to replace them immediately if you fail. Basically, if you decide to use nukes, you better make sure they hit. The funny thing is that, other than the obvious ability to delete units within a large radius, there's not much else to the nukes in this game in terms of consequences. And I don't even mean like, oh, the nuclear taboo has been broken. What does this mean for the future of this conflict? Nothing big like that. You can set off a 200 kiloton Baja blast on an airfield with a capture objective, and then do so right after, and there really are no real consequences. No radiation to speak of that might make a zone inaccessible for players in AI for some short amount of time, for example. That could be something that adds an extra layer of depth to the gameplay, being able to use nukes as a form of area denial for some amount of time. But I can't deny how satisfying it is to get a successful detonation, followed by having my ears blessed with those hit marker sounds from all of the units I just wiped out, as they just stood there, watching helplessly as the bombs descended from the clouds onto their base, knowing full well that they wouldn't have enough time to escape the blast radius, even if they tried. You know, it's really just a grand old time. And with the final nukes dropped, confrontation is concluded. I'm in no doubt about to get a fat promotion for my unreal, historic kill count while the region rebuilds for the next 2 decades. If you want a fairly detailed sim-cade combat flight game with a low barrier of entry, I really recommend that you give nuclear option a try. As I've said at the start of this video, I think there's an entire target demographic for this type of game out there that doesn't even know what this game actually is. And I think that, because I am the target demographic, and I thought this game was a DEFCON clone until I was fed a clip of the gameplay by the TikTok algorithm. If I hadn't seen that by random chance, I wouldn't have bought this game, and this video wouldn't have been made. If you're like me, and this game seems like something you'll enjoy, definitely give it a shot. There's a ton of hours to be spent here between what is already in the game and what can be made and uploaded to the workshop, despite it still being in early access. You'll be supporting Aussie devs too, so really...
Damn, Ozzy Osbourne just died.
Can't go wrong.
I want you to subscribe to me
Scav Merchant Hub.
on YouTube. Thank you, cringe.